Smell it first. Smoke. Decay. The metallic bite of blood dried into the cracks of polished marble. The air is hollow, not the clean cold of a winter morning, but the deep, suffocating cold of a place that was once warm with 1,000,000 human lives and has since been abandoned to silence. Now listen, the creak of timber that no one has repaired in decades. The distant sound of hooves, not the disciplined thunder of a Roman cavalry column, but the unpredictable clatter of men who don't march in formation because they've never needed to. They have already won. The year is 476 AD, and this hollow silence, this smell of ash and forgotten greatness. This is what the end of the world looks like. Not fire raining from heaven. Not a single catastrophic moment where God himself reaches down and wipes the slate clean. No, just a sandal abandoned on a cold marble floor. A torch burning down to nothing. A silence so complete it feels almost sacred, where there was once the roar, the laughter, the fury, and the genius of 1,000,000 souls. Now I want you to go back with me. Go back 12 centuries. It's 753 BC. A muddy hillside above a bend in the Tiber River, in the heart of the Italian peninsula. A cluster of reed-thatched huts clings to the edge of a volcanic plateau. The Mediterranean climate is generous here. The soil is dark and rich. The Tiber runs heavy with fish. A handful of cooking fires send thin threads of smoke into a cloudless Italian dawn, and on the hill above the river, a handful of shepherds are beginning their day, with absolutely no knowledge that they are standing on the most consequential piece of ground in the entire history of Western civilization. From mud and smoke and the smell of goats and the stubborn, relentless ambition of ordinary men. The greatest empire the human race has ever constructed, and we're going to watch it rise. We're going to stand at its impossible peak. We're going to watch the cracks form, and then we're going to watch it fall. Not the way a wall falls, not the way a fire burns out, the way a great tree falls, slowly, invisibly, the rot working inward from a wound taken so long ago that no one alive remembers when the wood was sound. And then one ordinary morning, a wind comes that the tree in its strength would have laughed at, and it goes down. And everyone who watches it fall asks the same bewildered question. Why so fast? Nothing about the fall of Rome was fast. Let me show you exactly why. Let's start with a single number. 1,000,000, by the reign of Augustus Caesar, the man who transformed a dying, bleeding republic into an empire without ever once formally calling it one. The city of Rome held approximately 1,000,000 permanent residents within its walls. 1,000,000 people in a single city. London would not reach 1,000,000 inhabitants until the year 1800 AD. Paris not until the middle of the 19th century. New York not until the 1870s. Rome achieved it 2,000 years before any of them, in a world without electricity, without engines, without antibiotics, without a single machine more complex than a water wheel. Now really think about what feeding 1,000,000 people requires every single day. 2,400 tons of grain, shipped across open water from the breadbaskets of Roman North Africa and Egypt, unloaded at the harbor of Ostia, hauled upriver by teams of oxen to feed a city that never slept and never stopped consuming. And this wasn't even sold, it was given away. A state grain dole supplied free food to 200,000 male citizens every single day. A welfare system of breathtaking administrative sophistication, requiring grain warehouses, shipping contracts, port infrastructure, and bureaucratic machinery stretched across 3 continents, held together by nothing but the Roman genius for organization. They also drank, prodigiously. Roman wine consumption per adult male, estimated between 1 and 1.5 liters per day. The amphora, that iconic 2-handled ceramic vessel, has been found in excavation from the Scottish Highlands to the Persian Gulf. And here is perhaps the most extraordinary monument to Roman consumption anywhere on Earth. The Monte Testaccio in Rome, a hill rising 35 meters above the surrounding landscape, composed almost entirely of broken amphora sherds. An estimated 53 million individual ceramic vessels, representing 4 centuries of olive oil imports, smashed and discarded at the edge of the city. It is, in the most literal sense, a mountain of ancient garbage. And it is one of the most astonishing things the Roman world ever left behind. But Rome was not merely a city of consumers. It was the beating administrative brain of a political organism that, at its absolute height under Emperor Trajan in 117 AD, controlled approximately 5 million square kilometers of territory, stretching from the fog-shrouded moorlands of northern Britain to the sun-blasted basalt plains of Mesopotamia, from the Atlantic coast of Portugal to the palm groves of the Egyptian Nile Delta. Within that territory lived an estimated 70 million people. Perhaps 1/5, 1 in every 5, of every human being alive on planet Earth at that moment in time was governed by Rome. The nervous system holding all of it together was the road network. 400,000 kilometers of surveyed, graded, and stone-paved roads, constructed with a precision not equaled anywhere in Europe until the 18th century. Built in layers, deep foundation of large stones, middle layer of rubble and mortar, surface of tightly fitted basalt blocks, with a slight camber to shed rainwater into flanking drainage ditches. They built these roads to last for centuries. And they did. Many are still there today, buried under modern asphalt, carrying 21st century traffic on foundations laid by Roman soldiers who have been dead for 2,000 years. And then there was the army, the supreme instrument through which all of this was built, held, and defended. The Roman legionary of the imperial period was not a frightened conscript dragged from his village. He was a professional soldier on a 25-year contract, trained in combat, engineering, field medicine, and logistics, capable of building a fully fortified camp from scratch at the end of every single day's march, capable of crossing a river in full armor, capable of covering 30 kilometers of road in a single day, carrying 40 kilograms on his back, and doing it again the next morning and the morning after that for months on end. His weapon, the gladius hispaniensis, the short Roman sword, was not designed for the long theatrical swings of Hollywood. It was engineered for one specific thing: a short, vicious, upward thrust between an opponent's ribs, at a distance of 12 inches, delivered from behind the protection of a curved rectangular shield, with the man to his left and the man to his right doing exactly the same thing at exactly the same moment. The Roman legionary did not fight as a person. He fought as a component in a machine. And for nearly 5 centuries, no force on this earth could reliably stop that machine. Stand in the city now. Stand in Rome on a September morning in 117 AD, the last year of the Emperor Trajan's reign, the moment the empire reaches its greatest territorial extent. The Forum of Trajan hums with the dense, layered energy of 10,000 people in motion simultaneously. Lawyers arguing cases under marble colonnades. Grain merchants from Carthage negotiating with buyers from Alexandria. A Greek philosopher lecturing young Roman aristocrats on Stoic ethics. A Syrian glassblower displaying translucent blue vessels so perfectly formed they would look at home in a modern art gallery. The smells, fresh bread, spices from the east, iron and blood from the meat market, and beneath everything, the deep, damp, earthy smell of a city built on ancient volcanic rock, honeycombed beneath with cisterns, drains, and the great brick-vaulted tunnels of the Cloaca Maxima, the grand sewer that has been carrying the waste of Roman civilization to the Tiber since the Age of Kings. This is the apex. This is what human ambition looks like when geography, climate, military technology, administrative genius, and 500 years of accumulated momentum all collide in one place at one moment in time. And the terrible truth is that by the time Rome reaches this summit, the forces that will destroy it are already in motion. The year is 165 AD. A Roman army is returning from the sack of the Parthian capital in Mesopotamia, flushed with victory, loaded with plunder, and carrying something invisible in their bodies, something they picked up in the river cities of the ancient Near East that will kill more Romans than any enemy army ever has. A fever, first, then a rash, raised, red, spreading across the skin in patterns that Roman army physicians have never seen in their lives. Then death, quiet and efficient, moving through the column like a shadow moving across the ground. What they were carrying was almost certainly a catastrophic strain of smallpox, encountering a population of 70 million people who had developed absolutely zero immunity to it, and it spread along the Roman road network. That supreme achievement of connectivity, the pride of the empire, at exactly the rate that soldiers and merchants moved. Within 5 years, it had reached every single province. At its peak, 2,000 people per day were dying in Rome alone. Total deaths across the empire, between 5 and 10 million people, as much as 10% of everyone. Agricultural labor became scarce. Tax revenues collapsed. Military recruitment, already difficult along an overstretched frontier, became a genuine crisis. And the Roman worldview, which had always rested on a deep, almost religious confidence in the permanence and superiority of Roman civilization, began, for the very first time, to crack. Rome absorbed the blow. Barely. The structure held. The legions kept marching. The grain ships kept sailing. But the blow had been taken. The wound was open. And the empire would never be quite as strong again. What follows across the next 2 centuries is a cascade of compounding catastrophes, each one exploiting the weakness left by the last, each one leaving Rome a little more hollowed out, a little more fragile than it was before. The crisis of the 3rd century, 235 to 284 AD. 50 years of almost uninterrupted catastrophe. In that half-century alone, the empire endured 54 different claimants to the imperial throne. 54. The average reign lasted less than 3 years, and most of them ended in assassination. The silver content of the Roman coin, the denarius, collapsed from 85% under Marcus Aurelius to barely 2% by 268 AD. Inflation made long-term economic planning nearly impossible. Trade networks that had functioned with extraordinary efficiency for centuries began to break down as the roads became unsafe, the currency untrustworthy, the administration unreliable. Cities that had been growing for 500 years began to shrink. Walls were built around urban centers that had never needed walls before. The empire was consuming itself from the inside. And then, just as Rome was beginning to stabilize under the iron will of Emperor Diocletian, another plague arrived. The plague of Cyprian, beginning in 249 AD and hitting in waves for nearly 20 years. 5,000 deaths per day in Rome at its peak. Entire cities in Roman North Africa losing 30 to 40% of their populations within a single generation. The economic devastation was absolute. The psychological impact was even worse. People genuinely, for the first time, stopped believing that Rome was permanent. Now, add the climate. The Roman warm period, a 5-century climatic optimum that had blessed the Mediterranean with stable temperatures, reliable rainfall, and exceptional agricultural productivity, began to falter in the late 2nd century. Ice core data, tree ring analysis, sediment records from across the Mediterranean basin. All of them tell the same story. Beginning around 150 AD, the climate began shifting. Cooler, more erratic. Agricultural yields declined across the empire's most productive regions. Roman North Africa, which had been the breadbasket of the ancient world, began showing signs of desertification. The granary that fed 1 million people in Rome was beginning to run low. And then there are the people on the other side of the wall. The Germanic tribes, the Goths, the Vandals, the Alemanni, the Franks had been pressure on the Roman frontier for centuries. But they were not, in the 3rd and 4th centuries, the same people they had been in the 1st. They had been in contact with Rome for generations. They had traded with Rome, served in Roman armies, adopted Roman military tactics, Roman weapons, Roman organizational structures. They had studied their enemy. They had learned, and simultaneously, they were being pushed from behind, hard, by the westward migration of the Hunnic people from the Central Asian steppes, a movement driven by their own climatic pressures as the grasslands of the Eurasian interior dried and contracted. 376 AD. A Gothic chieftain named Fritigern stands on the northern bank of the Danube River with approximately 200,000 of his people. Men, women, children, cattle, wagons, the elderly, and the Huns at his back. He sends emissaries to the Roman Emperor Valens across the river. The message is simple: let us cross. Let us settle inside the Roman frontier. We will farm your land, fill your legions, serve your empire. We ask only for protection from the Huns. Valens agrees, and what follows is a masterclass in how not to receive refugees. The Roman officials assigned to manage the Gothic crossing are corrupt and incompetent. Food supplies promised to the Goths simply fail to arrive. The officials extort money and valuables from desperate people. Gothic children are taken as slaves in exchange for dog meat. People are starving inside the Roman frontier while Roman officials grow rich. Within 2 years, the accumulated humiliation and starvation have transformed a request for sanctuary into a full-armed uprising. And on August 9th, 378 AD, at the Battle of Adrianople in what is now northwestern Turkey, the Gothic forces under Fritigern do something that should have been impossible. They destroy a Roman army of between 15 and 20,000 men. The Emperor Valens himself is killed. His body is never recovered, burned in a farmhouse where he had crawled for shelter during the rout. Adrianople is the hinge. It is the moment when it becomes undeniably, demonstrably clear that the Roman army, the supreme military instrument of the ancient world, the machine that had conquered the known world and held it for 5 centuries, can be beaten in open battle by forces it had always dismissed as barbarian. The psychological shock across the empire is total. The military response is fatally compromised because Rome no longer has the manpower or the financial resources to rebuild the losses the way it once could. From this point forward, the Roman army increasingly depends on Gothic and Germanic allied troops. Men fighting under their own leaders, with their own customs, with a loyalty to Rome that is contractual rather than cultural. Loyalty that is, therefore, negotiable. The process doesn't stop. It accelerates. The empire that once felt like the permanent, indestructible architecture of the universe is now visibly, undeniably crumbling. September 4th, 476 AD. A Germanic chieftain named Odoacer, himself a former officer in the Roman army, commanding troops who were themselves former Roman soldiers, walks into the palace at Ravenna and deposes the last Western Roman emperor. His name is Romulus Augustulus. He is 16 years old. Romulus, the name of the legendary shepherd who founded the city of Rome 7 centuries earlier. Augustulus, a diminutive of Augustus, the title of the man who built the empire at its greatest. The last emperor of the greatest civilization the Western world had ever produced was named after both its beginning and its peak. And he was removed from power without ceremony, exiled to a comfortable villa in the Campania countryside, and paid a generous pension, because Odoacer considered him too young, too weak, and too irrelevant to be worth the trouble of killing. No dramatic final battle. No symbolic moment of fire and ruin. No divine judgment. Just a letter. Odoacer wrote politely to the Eastern Emperor Zeno in Constantinople, informing him that the West no longer required a separate emperor, that one emperor for the whole empire would be sufficient, and that he, Odoacer, would administer the Western territories as Zeno's loyal representative. A polite fiction. Both men understood it perfectly. The empire in the West was finished. In the century that followed, the population of the city of Rome collapsed from approximately 1 million to somewhere between 30 and 50,000 people. The great aqueducts, no longer maintained, ran dry or were deliberately cut. Without running water, the dense urban population of the ancient city became impossible to sustain. The great apartment blocks, empty and unmaintained, fell into ruin. The marble of temples was burned in lime kilns to produce construction mortar for smaller, simpler, humbler buildings. The bronze statues that had lined the great forums were melted down for weapons and farming tools. The Forum Romanum, once the pulsing heart of Western civilization, the place where Cicero had spoken and Caesar had triumphed and Augustus had remade the known world, became a cow pasture, Medieval Romans called it the Campo Vaccino, the cow field, long-distance trade, which had sustained a level of material prosperity across the Mediterranean world that would not be seen again for over a millennium, contracted with breathtaking speed. The sophisticated, interconnected, continent-spanning economic network that Rome had created simply ceased to exist within a single generation. It took Europe approximately 1,000 years, 10 full centuries, to recover the level of urban complexity, long-distance trade, and architectural sophistication that Rome had achieved at its peak. 1,000 years of slower, harder, shorter, more dangerous human lives, lived out in the ruins and the shadows of a civilization that had once made all of this look effortless. Rome was not destroyed by an outside force. Rome was not conquered by the Goths, or the Vandals, or the Huns. Rome was unmade, slowly, methodically, over centuries, by the accumulated weight of its own complexity, by the brittleness that comes with a system too large, too interconnected, too dependent on the continued, simultaneous functioning of every single one of its 10,000 moving parts. When the climate shifted, the agricultural surplus that funded everything else began to shrink. When the surplus shrank, the tax base contracted. When the tax base contracted, the military weakened. When the military weakened, the borders became porous. When the borders became porous, the trade networks became unsafe. When the trade networks became unsafe, the cities emptied. When the cities emptied, the accumulated knowledge concentrated in them. The engineering, the medicine, the law, the philosophy began to scatter and fade and disappear. A cascade, each stage enabling the next. The system that appeared from the outside to be the most powerful and durable human civilization ever constructed was revealed at the moment of its dissolution to have been precisely as strong as its most vulnerable point. We live in a civilization more interconnected, more complex, more dependent on the continuous functioning of its systems than anything Rome ever imagined in its most ambitious dreams. Our supply chains span the globe. Our food systems depend on GPS satellites and container ships and refrigeration grids and political stability across dozens of countries simultaneously. Our power grids, our communications networks, our financial systems, each one a marvel of human ingenuity, each one a web of 10,000 interdependencies, each one exactly as strong as its weakest node. The men and women of Rome did not believe they would fall. They could not imagine it. They had built something so vast, so brilliant, so seemingly permanent that the idea of its absence was literally inconceivable to them. And then one autumn morning, a 16-year-old boy handed over a purple robe and walked to his villa by the sea. And it was over. And no one quite realized it was over for quite some time, because endings never announce themselves. They arrive quietly. They arrive in the form of small failures that seem temporary, small declines that seem reversible, small cracks in systems that have always held before. History does not repeat itself, but it does, with extraordinary patience and with an almost unsettling consistency. Rhyme. Stand in the ruins of Rome on a quiet morning. In the Forum, among the broken columns, with the cats sleeping in the shade of temples that once held gods. And listen, the silence there is not empty. It is full of question. A warning dressed as architecture. A civilization that burns so brightly it left its light in the very bones of our language, our law, and our way of thinking about the world, asking us, across 2,000 years of rubble and silence, the only question that has ever truly mattered.